Welcome to another episode of the Astrology of Family Karma and Relationships podcast. I'm your host, Alexander Mallon, and today again we have a wonderful guest astrologer and counselor, Lisa Hagenbuch, and I'm so happy that you're joining me again today and joining us, Lisa. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
You too, Alexander. Thank you so much.
So our topic today is astrology and family constellations therapy. And we're going to be using, I think, one family that's quite well known these days, the Trump family, and their transgenerational chart work to explain a little bit about astrology and family constellation work. So we'll jump into our presentation here.
Okay.
Whoops, so sorry for that delay, the wrong slide up. So again, astrology and family constellations therapy, the Trump family and transgenerational astrology. And so, Lisa, please do tell the audience a little bit about yourself. We did do sort of part one of this a couple weeks ago, and now this is a little more sort of deep diving. But folks, let Lisa fill you in about her work.
Okay, thank you so much. So I live in the Chicagoland area and I see clients in several locations. I also do Zoom and in person. I do astrological consultations, and I also do family constellation sessions, which is an energetic modality that helps to put back into order outdated intergenerational patterns that are negatively affecting the client in their daily life. I also do tarot readings, so just kind of blending a number of things together.
Terrific, thank you. Really well. So we have the slide that we showed last time a little bit, Lisa, that this work, this family constellations work and transgenerational astrology work that you specialize in, that it's really focused on ancestral healing. And of course, by the way, somebody might notice that, my podcast, ergo my inviting Lisa particularly, Astrology of Family Karma, I think, Lisa, you and I have a similar kind of groove here in what we do with the birth charts for our clients and how we look at the chart and the chart information.
Yeah, so and what's great about looking at it from a generational perspective is then you can really start to see themes and patterns. And so transgenerational astrology, we like to dig into 3 to 4 generations going backward. And then so it's great to have the awareness of the patterns, and we can see them in the birth charts, and we can understand how they're impacting our daily lives. But then what do you do with the awareness? So there are a number of ancestral healing modalities. I specialize in family constellation work, where you can kind of, I would say it's like flying a drone above a situation and getting an idea of what the dynamics are involved in it. And then using healing statements and ancestral, calling in the ancestors to do the shifting with the client so that when things are put back in order in the constellation work, then the patterns can shift and show up differently in the client's outer world experiences, and it gives them more peace and some resolution and hopefully some positive unfoldment in their future.
So this all falls under your other training and experience and expertise in family constellations work, particularly. Although, of course, to the listener and viewer, family constellations is not necessarily a branch of astrology in any particular way. It's just a term and a title. And maybe you could tell us a little bit again about the founder of family constellations work. It's a therapeutic
Yeah.
model, a therapy model.
Yeah, will do, because it pairs great with astrology, but it really has nothing to do with astrology. So Bert Hellinger was he's German, and he and did a number of different modalities, including being like a Jesuit priest, and but he spent some time with the Zulu tribes, and it was in blending everything that he knew with his experience with that tribe that he noticed that there were orders of love within a family system, and that if the orders were in, if everybody had but everybody belonged, everybody had their place, and the love flowed from the ancestors down to the descendants, that things tended to go well within their society. And then he noticed how in other cultures. Particularly my teacher will say when agriculture was introduced,
Mm.
that there were different factors introduced and things started to go awry and out of order within the family system. And
Mm.
if there's an issue, it doesn't die in one generation. The issue is picked up by a descendant like a baton to try to make the family system whole and maybe bring in people that were excluded, or to entangle with something to try to heal it. But then it goes awry in the descendant's life because it wasn't their issue. It didn't start with them. It doesn't belong to them. So the descendant that comes in to do the ancestral work is really giving a gift. Not only, the Lakota tradition believes the healing goes back 7 generations and forward 7 generations. So one person in this moment doing ancestral healing can not only help the ancestors who are going to come back, in their incarnations, but also to help the descendants to not have to deal with the issues and the traumas, that they can be positively shifted so that we don't have this. We're going to clearly see today when you don't do the work, it just kind of picks up energetic steam and just keeps, intensifying.
So you bring up an interesting connection from Bert's work with the Zulu tribe, and then you make reference to Native American Lakota Sioux tribes, and how these cultures, and I think you're probably suggesting, review their shared ancestry. They have
Mm.
a sense of ancestry, a sense of,
Yeah,
we call it tribal ancestry, I guess, is a view, but this sense that that the ancestors of yesterday created our today and we create our tomorrow. There's a sense of continuation and connection that, maybe, I mean, not being born and raised in the US here, I don't know that I really have that sense of lineage. We
right.
all come from some lineage, for some background. Most Americans are not Native Americans, and so we come from some other place in the globe, and
Yeah.
therein we have a great deal of lineage. And 23andMe and so forth.
Yeah,
Most of us have checked our lineage. We have a sense that there is this important ancestry, but we're not immediately connected to it. It's almost like a
right.
surprising tertiary or secondary thought. But here, some of the family constellations work that you're suggesting, I think you're telling me, has a deep connection, a deep reverence for those connections.
Yeah, reverence is a great word, I think, because I think we can get too much, Americans are very individualistic in a way,
Yes.
and feel like they're kind of an island unto themselves. But essentially, we're all born into a family system that we are inextricably tied to. You kind of can't cut the cord on the DNA in your family lineage. So whether you're close with them or not, there is this shared lineage. We all have a common lineage, but we all have individual fates and destinies. And so it's about being within a family system, but understanding we leave fates with the other people and continue our destiny.
By all means, and I think as a practitioner myself of many, many years, I definitely see that resonate. People ask me what I focus on, particularly in my practice as well, and it is family work. I think of all the things, particularly in the West, as a U.S. citizen, particularly as an American, this Western Judeo-Christian root that many of us have here. To me, a chart is a descriptor of my birth for my family, but it's a descriptor of the family members around me as I'm being born. It's a descriptor of the genetics that's underpinning my birth chart, my existence. The chart describes that whole genetic family tree. I think we chatted about it last time, but oftentimes, I guess I do, that one of my recent television programs on public broadcasting system under attack right now, by the way, again, from certain political factions, a show called Finding Your Roots
Oh, yeah,
with
right.
Dr. Henry Gates Jr., I believe it is. Finding
Mhm.
Your Roots. This idea that our lineage is even, let's say, chromosomal. It's in us. It's
Yeah,
us. It's in
yeah.
our very fiber of being.
We can't escape it. So better to understand it and shift, what you can in a positive manner. And it pairs so well with astrology because everyone and everything in your life is contained in the birth chart. So your ancestors are literally in the chart, and for females, like we come in with the eggs that literally carry the DNA of our ancestry. So, I mean, as women, we're kind of walking, we're a walking family system
A
that we
walking
can't
fam
escape from.
Lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
So true. My degree, my background's in art therapy. I was working as an art therapist and for a number of years as I was building my astrology practice. And I also have a bit of training in body-centered Gestalt, which again I think, and how I understood and took some of that training in body-centered Gestalt, the Gestalt work, is this embodiment, this physical embodiment of what we go through, this physical embodiment of what befalls us. We could sometimes look at life that way, that life happens at us or to us, and
Yeah.
or the interweaving of what we co-create, what happens to us, how we happen to it, how we are interrelating, and all of it. I'm sure you and I agree here. It has very definite ties to our family and to our upbringing. The genetic piece, and then the
Mhm.
family modeling piece that has been handed down, literally
Right.
generationally. So those
Yeah,
are sort of
exactly.
found. And I agree. Why astrology? Why an astrology show? The family constellations work or the body centered gestalt? Because charts are this wonderful tool to graphically show
Hmm.
these roots, these histories. So let's go back to our presentation really quickly here, if we can. So. So, discussing the ancestral healing modality, the transgenerational astrology, family constellations, how the chart describes our moving through the world, and how we have sort of an inner template that is in some ways set for us, not only genetically but in this immediate conscious awareness, in this immediate family awareness. So yeah, you and I were chatting about what who how can we kind of make this something tangible, and that
Yeah,
this
right.
particular family tree is a family that we know a lot about lately. We hear so much about our President Trump and about his family. So yeah, there's much to be reviewed perhaps here.
Hmm. Hmm. Many themes that you see being passed on the generational line.
So we have a whole family tree that you've presented for us. Maybe you want to just touch on this briefly.
Yeah, so I found this visual online, and I think we're going to also mention that I had done a larger presentation on this for an astrological organization. So a lot of these slides are kind of borrowed from it, but there are a couple of things I wanted to point out in this particular visual is that we see one of the things that is really significant in transgenerational astrology is the name, and oftentimes the name is literally passed down from one generation to the next. So as we see, we have Frederick Trump, and then Frederick or Fred was his son, or is his son, I guess I should say is it still, continues. And then Fred actually had Fred Jr. And so it's really interesting. This is one of the things that's really significant in putting these dysfunctional patterns back in order is when somebody is excluded. And this is a visual representation of Fred Jr. being excluded because there wasn't even a visual of his face. And one of the things from this presentation, I had drawn a lot from Mary Trump's book on the family history, and that was her father. And because Freddie Jr. really didn't have the killer instinct, his dad said, he then focused more on creating the businesses through Donald. And so this is a type of, exclusion. And this, I thought it was really interesting. Number one, you can see so many common names in this visual between like Fred and Donald and Elizabeth. But we also have our visual representation of an exclusion, which will always cause ripples of disharmony and dysfunction through the family system.
So for those who are just listening to our program on podcast and not watching this on YouTube, we have a little graphic family tree. And was this graphic, this family Trump family tree, was this taken from Mary's book?
No, I think it was, I think up at the top, it was a family tree that I found, just a visual
Uh-huh.
of
So I'm,
online.
I'm wondering, when
So,
you mentioned that Frederick Jr., whose face is not shown in this visual, he's like, as you said,
mhm.
excluded. I was wondering, who presented this, that Junior is excluded, has no photograph here as
Yeah,
the
I guess I think it's the
origin.
National Journal I see up top. It just, I liked it because it just, well, we were focusing more just on Donald in a way. So we, it had him in the center. And
Sure.
so, yeah, it was a visual, but I thought it was for purposes of what we're talking about. It's,
Mm.
it was just kind of interesting to me that for people watching on YouTube, you can see that, there's no visual image of him.
Of Frederick Jr. Yeah. So
Frederick.
that's why when you were discussing this earlier, Mary, who wrote the book, Mary Trump, who wrote the book about Donald, is one of many books out there about President Trump. But her father was Frederick Trump Jr. That's why I know that that's where I heard the story. He wasn't a killer. He
Yeah,
wasn't going to be the one that Frederick Sr. would pass on the fortune, the
business,
lineage, the business empire. It wasn't going to go
right.
to Frederick Jr. because he didn't have the killer instinct. I had heard that somewhere.
Yeah, she said in the family they were killers and losers. And so
Killers and
if you were not a killer, you were a loser.
ah.
And there's stories about, how he was treated in the family lineage. So,
So astrologically, you have a slide here that kind of directs our attention that there are several prominent themes in these astrological charts of uh, Frederick and Fred, the son, and Donald Jr., that those who are studying astrology might want to focus on the Venus, Mars, and the Pluto in these
yeah.
charts.
Yeah, there just seem to be some really common themes. And for the three generations that we're primarily going to focus on, although we're bringing, Don Jr. into this as well. I think each of, starting with Frederick, who would be Donald's grandfather, I think, he exemplified the Mars theme, and then Fred, Donald's father, more the Venus, and then I think Donald more the Pluto. So it was, for purposes of this talk, those are three planets I really wanted to kind of, hone in on, and we can discuss together and see the themes, the repetitive themes in those three
And
planets.
it might serve well for the audience also to those who might not know astrology really well to understand what these three planets in a birth chart can symbolize. I mean, I think most people are gonna generally understand, from modern musical media, Venus and Mars, right?
Right.
But maybe we should just clarify what Venus symbolizes, Mars symbolizes, and Pluto symbolize in our birth charts.
Sure. So Venus rules love and money, if you will. Love, the ability to receive, attract, and then money, resources, value systems. So those are common themes with Venus, very feminine in nature. And so then, whereas Mars is very masculine in nature, Mars represents anything that we desire to do, and it has a lot to do with work, and independence and risk taking. It's very much a business type of energy, but it's also, it can be, assertive if not aggressive. It's, kind of the god of war. So the
The
killer.
god Venus, the goddess of love, Mars, the god of
Yeah,
war, right?
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Good point. And then with Pluto, is it thought to be another octave more of the Martian energy, but Pluto has a lot to do with power and control. Um, on the positive side, kind of stepping into empowerment, and there is a lot of transformation that occurs with Pluto energy, and there's a lot of potential for transformation. And so that can be taken, I always say I don't look at anything as good or bad, it's just energy. So you can take it in either direction. um, on the one hand, Pluto can be like, let's create conditions that are good for all. And then, but or versus like, let's focus on what's good for me.
So, if I may, I like so those of you out there who listened or watched my program before, you might know, and Lisa, I think you do know, I'm a very, very avid backyard astronomer. How I found my way into astrology decades and decades ago, and I like to look at the astronomy of things too to tell me like why is Venus the goddess of love astrologically? Why is Venus about money, love? Why is Mars about action? Why is Pluto about deep themes of power and generational? Venus's cycle is about a year and a half, right? And its orbit around the sun.
Yeah.
Mars' orbit is 2 years. Pluto's orbit, 248 years. So in astrology, Venus and its placement in our charts describes relational themes, relating themes, connecting themes, social themes. We could say every year and a half, every year and 3/4, that the average person will have a Venus return to where it was when they were born, their birth chart, and we're going to review our relational themes. There is a coincidence of where we stand relationally, family, love, relationships. A little tougher to see in common parlance, I think, but Mars is a 2-year orbit, and Mars cycles tend to coincide every 2 years with reviewing our career, reviewing our job, reviewing our job, reviewing our title, reviewing our efforts, reviewing our actions, reviewing our directed willpower. And Pluto, a 248-year orbit, is a generational, excuse me, a generational and intergenerational planet. So when we look at Pluto cycles, we look at major generational cultural themes that we're born into as well. So I don't know if that sort of rounds things off. Maybe you have other thoughts about it.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, that's fabulous.
Okay. So moving forward, Frederick's chart. We have Frederick Trump, born March 14th of 1869. We don't have a time. Born in Germany, March 14 of 1869. So he's a Pisces sun sign. March 14 means he's a few days away from being an Aries. Aries are known to be the beginning of the year, the beginning of the growing season, and Aries are the transition point. You could think of the end of March, the vernal equinox every year. We transition from 4 or 5 months of winter, maybe even stasis during winter. You could say Pisces. I always think of Pisces as a winter sign, the tail end of it's a water sign. The rain falls on top of the snow and ice. Winter breaks and gives way to spring. So Pisces is a transitional sign, Frederick's chart, and Aries is this sign of every springtime, breaking forward, busting loose.
Mm-hmm.
I literally lived in the Catskill Mountains for a number of years, and we had I love to tell the story. We had about 4 foot of hard packed snow, and then suddenly late March we had 9 inches of rain overnight. And what happens to 4 foot of mountain hard packed snow with 9 inches of rain is torrents and terrible floods that we see happening so often now worldwide and in our nation. But it's that ripping through, the breakthrough energy. So
Yeah.
Frederick Senior, born in Germany, 1869. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, and there's a slide that talks about the history, if you want to go to that for a minute. Okay. So yeah, so he was born in Germany at the age of 16. He came to America, the his with his Aries energy, moon in Aries, and the sun being on the more on the cusp. That's very much an Aries thing to do. Aries energy is more like risk taker, or because it rules firemen and policemen, and it's like, well, what would this adventure be like? Oh, let's go to America. So at the age of 23, he became a US citizen, and he moved to Washington State at the time of the gold rush. So
Wow.
I don't know if he was originally going to mine for gold, but shortly after moving there, he opened up a number of businesses, which is very much Aries energy. So he opened up restaurants and brothels, and he supplied alcohol to the miners in British Columbia. So the alcohol would go back to the Pisces energy. So I find that interesting. And so he went back to the area of Germany, which is was around the time, area of where Bavaria is, and he met his future wife, and so and then they moved to the U.S. For his businesses, and then she became homesick, so they moved back to Germany. But because he had not performed his mandatory military service, which is again a very Martian theme. Mars rules the military. Because he had avoided doing that, he either had to do the service, which he didn't want to do, and so he left the country and came back to live in the United States. And this is how we have the Trump family more settled in the United States. Um, he married Elizabeth Christ, and they moved to New York. Um, and eventually settled, in the Queens area of New York. And Frederick actually ended up dying of the Spanish flu at
Mm.
age 48. So now we have a pandemic theme kind of introduced into the family lineage, which is a theme that we will continue with President Trump.
So I'm hearing three themes. I'm hearing immigration. Actually, I'm hearing four themes.
Yeah.
I'm hearing Germany and something I don't know if you mentioned yet, but that time of Frederick's birth, 1869, 1871 was the German unification. It was the German Empire being born in 1871, and Prussia and Germany and Denmark and those surrounding nations. So the whole sort of German Empire was born in 1871, and in those years of 1870s, Germany suffered a terrible financial crisis, which probably would have had a young man, emigrate and move somewhere to have financial opportunity. So I'm hearing financial crises. I'm hearing immigration. I'm hearing uh, 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 a few things: brothels and gold rush. Sort of a man who's a good businessman, one could say, or maybe one could say a profiteer. And I
Yes.
think I did read something about Frederick that suggested he was a kind of a profiteer. How can he make money in any which way? Alcohol, restaurants, brothels, whatever
Yeah.
will make a buck. Survival, one could say too. And then I hear he gets married, moves back to Germany, but because he didn't provide military service, Germany forced basically kicked him out. He finds himself back in the U.S. Then he dies of the Spanish flu. If we could look at the
Immigrated.
chart,
Yeah, and it's interesting, just a couple of other notes on that. He was known in terms of he was very much you know, very clever in terms of with the businesses. When one area would kind of dry up in the gold rush, they said he would actually put his restaurant or brothel, he would actually float it to another area and then start all over and in another area. So he was very clever and very, how to take advantage of and stay, one step ahead of his competition, if you will.
yeah, I think that when I did do some reading at some point in the last year or two, and yeah, I recall what you're saying, that the implication in the history, maybe Wikipedia, whatever, was that he was shrewd. He was a
Yeah,
shrewd businessman. He was sly, he was shrewd, and he was a survivor. But I
a
do believe
survivor
he
for
did.
sure.
I do believe he did go to Alaska for the regarding the gold rush. Like that
Mhm.
was the impetus. So interesting in
Very
Frederick.
Martian Venus themes for sure. Yeah.
Right. Well, so the Venus theme here in Frederick's chart with his sun in Pisces, with that Venus in Pisces for Frederick's chart, uh, and then we have that martial theme, the theme of the military.
Mhm.
Mars opposite his Mercury, Mars on the nodes, and his sun is nearly in the sign of Aries. His moon is in the sign of Aries. He's a new moon baby. He's born just after the new moon.
Mhm.
And that sun is only days away from being born, March 14th, his birth date, 1869, Frederick. He's almost an Aries sun sign with an Aries moon. So there's a lot of Aries energy again. Although we could say it's like hidden, it's Pisceanly hidden. You know, is he Aries? Is he aggressive? Is he directive? Is he a survivor? Is he entrepreneurial? All those Aries traits, most certainly. But we do see a little bit. He knows how to uh, put on a certain show. That Mars is very prominent, folks. That Mars and that Saturn are very prominent in this guy's chart, Frederick Senior. So that Mars North Node is a powerful theme, and that Mars and South Node Mercury conjunction are T squared at Pluto. So
Mhm.
here we have an interesting thing I noticed. Frederick's Pluto was in the sign of Taurus. So we know we're dealing with a grandparent, great grandfather for some, because that Pluto, generational planet, it spends I think it's like what is it now? 32 years in the sign of Taurus. It's a generational planet indicating a strong conceptual generational zeitgeist. Uh,
Mhm.
for reference sake, those listeners and viewers all have Pluto either in Libra, Virgo, or Leo. If you're a boomer, I'm born just past. I think we're born just past the boomer generation. The boomers all had Pluto in Leo generation, and those in the 40s and 30s, and even in the 20s had a Pluto in Cancer. So Frederick preceded that. This really is, that turning point of the 1800s into the 1900s. That's interesting too. But that Pluto's square that Mars, the
Mhm.
square inner tension between Mars and Pluto. So as you said, Lisa, Mars Pluto Venus themes that are very prominent in the Trump family lineage. So that
Mhm.
Mars and Leo, by the way, make note, right? Mars
Yeah,
and Leo for Frederick,
that'll come
uh,
back.
Senior, the great grandfather now for Junior.
Yeah.
In Fred Trump's chart, we have that Mars in Capricorn. But just fast forwarding, so Frederick, the one who moved from Germany and brought the lineage to the U.S., Mars and Leo conjoin the North Node of Dharma and Karma. Donald Trump, Mars and Leo, conjunct his ascendant. Don Jr., Mars and Leo, approaching his ascendant in a conjunction with his ascendant as well. So again, those Mars themes, intergenerational, as you said, are really, really powerful for the
Yeah.
Trump legacy.
Mhm.
So Fred Trump, October 11th, 1905.
Mhm.
That's Donald's father.
Yes, Donald's father. So if we go into some history, of course, he was born in the Bronx and he incorporated um a corporation. He was too young to do it on his own, under his own name. So he did that. He incorporated with his mother. And so one of the great things and the reason why I had kind of put a lot of Venus themes with Fred, number one, when he began the business, it actually was officially under his mother's name at the start. But one of the things that he took great advantage of is the government funding for building during the Depression. So again, a little bit of a pandemic theme in a sense of like a great tragedy and from a cultural perspective. So he was really shrewd as well. He knew how to work the courts, which, Libra, that's ruled by Venus, right? He had great political connections and business contracts. But he went to Virginia Beach to build the first Federal Housing Administration development with government money. He also really, again, a financial theme ruled by Venus, but he used the tax deferment system to his great advantage, to the point where he was investigated for profiteering by a U.S. Senate committee in 1954, ended up ruining his reputation. So he was investigated. I put down that he saw the seams of what he could get away with. He wasn't technically breaking the law. This is again a theme that I think, continues down the generational line. Um, but he was investigated, and again with a little bit maybe with minorities and immigration. He was sued by the U.S. Justice Civil Rights Division for not renting to minorities. Um, but
That was a big one. Having been born in New York in my 20s and 30s, that that lawsuit in New York State for not renting to minorities, that was the tip of the iceberg. There was a lot more that he did to minorities to defraud them of their money in so many ways from Sunday. And eventually, after a number of years, nearly, I think, roughly, I'm throwing it out from my memory, like about a decade or so, I believe that the Trump family was not a good name in New York. You know, that New Yorkers they were, but they were not loved in New York for especially this horrible disenfranchising and ripping off and financially profiteering off of minority suffering. That was not a big name builder for the Trumps.
yeah, and he was really, again, shrewd, very good at skirting. He didn't officially break the law, but he skirted it enough and caused it really ended up ruining his reputation. And one of the other things I found really interesting about Fred was he was really highly influenced by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. So, and that was using self-confidence as kind of a life philosophy, only allowed positive emotions. And so you really weren't able, it again is one of those, it, we talked about it in the first episode, more about epigenetics, I think, and creating a culture of like everything had to be, by all accounts, he could be pretty mean-spirited in his family interactions, but in terms of his business, for sure, like he just put on the positive emotions. Everything was great, and even when it wasn't, and so that I think is a genetic. I mean, turned on like kind of a genetic marker, a key, if you will, that I think definitely carried, and he um definitely would have had a major influence on President Trump, Donald Trump, and how he presents as everything is the best,
The best.
So
Well, interesting.
I thought that
Interesting
was
too,
really
Lisa, that Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, in his book, The Power of Positive Thinking, that was a groundbreaking book in the 70s, particularly 60s, 70s, right?
mhm,
For those
mhm.
who don't know, because this goes back a little bit. It was like one of the first super successful self-help, self-supporting, psychological thinking, self-help books of our era.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I found it really kind of interesting. And he was a worker, a hard worker. He worked all the time by all accounts. And so those were kind of the big themes in his history that stood out to me. And then we can look at his chart.
So some standouts in this chart. You're talking about the Venus and the
Mhm.
Mars, and then also that Pluto placement. Let me move my picture aside here for a moment,
Okay, yeah, thanks.
and then the Pluto here opposite that Mars
Mhm. Mhm.
and square that Venus.
Mhm.
So actually, I'm noticing, Lisa, what's called a grand cross in
Yeah.
Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump's chart, a grand cross of Pluto opposite Mars, Uranus, and those planets T square, a rather grand cross, I should say, to a Venus opposing moon. So we have got a big grand cross in this chart of four planets that are square to each other.
Mhm.
Mars, Uranus, square moon, moon in Pisces, almost Aries, moon in
Mhm.
Pisces, almost the sign of Aries, moon 25 Pisces, square the Pluto, Pluto square the Venus. So a big box or a grand cross in this chart. I don't know
And
what can, yeah.
yeah, especially that moon, to me, the moon opposite Venus in Pisces, Pisces can put on the rose-colored glasses, right? So if you go back to the power of positive thinking, everything is always rosy and I think it was part, Venus is very much an attractor, right? So I think it helped him to attract contacts and money and all of that because he could put on a good story. He's a storyteller. He could say, everything's great and this is what we're going to do. We have all these big plans, but was it actually factually accurate all the time? Probably not.
So Venus symbolizes love and loving relations. So in a family therapeutic kind of a way, I wonder how do you see Venus and how do you see Moon in a person's chart when it comes to themes of family connections? And let's not forget, we just reviewed one of the things that the Trump family was super, super famous for, not a good way, was their disenfranchising, not renting to minorities in Manhattan and in New York City area. So Moon, I think they say is Moon mommy and nurturing, and Venus is love.
Yeah. Except, I think of all these energies operate on a spectrum, right? So, on the very positive, he could have been a very loving, supportive type of father. By all accounts, you don't hear a lot of that with Fred. And Mary went into great detail because she spent a lot of time, with her grandparents. But one of the things she said is that he was absent a lot, right? His moon is in the sixth house of work. So he put a lot of his love and support probably into his job, into his work. And so um I think he was a strong man, but I don't know that I would necessarily say it was the type of strength that works well in the family line, because there's something in the family constellations where we talk about the strength of men, but that's the strength of somebody that would die for their family, would but is also very in make the money, but also very loving and supportive. And when he was, we go back to that killers and losers, putting people in two camps.
Mm.
um there aren't a lot of great stories about him being pretty the warm and fuzzy type. So I think he kind of took the Pisces, um and I think of it more as like absence, versus, I don't know that he had a, substance abuse problem, which is, addictions can be another thing with Pisces, but I don't think he was very present.
So, I look at again, this is an important configuration, this grand cross.
Mhm.
Anyone with a grand cross in a chart, it's a standout configuration. Those four planets that are square or 90 degrees to each other, and
Mhm.
four planets that are in opposition to each other. So that grand cross, some have astrologers used to call it sort of feeling as though you're born on nailed to the cross, or you're carrying a cross. This kind of envisionment. But what it means astrologically, I think most astrologers would concur, is of opposing forces. Opposing forces are oppositions, and I always say a square, like Moon to Mars or Moon to Pluto or Pluto to Venus. A square is like inner tension. I always think of a wall and a ceiling, inner
Yeah.
tension. So astrologically, it suggests that Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, Venus opposing Moon, that there was some emotional distancing or disconnect from his affections, that this is not a man who flows. I mean, technically, Astrology 101, I think if people were to read, my natal moon is opposing my natal Venus, my birth chart natal Venus, some oppositional force was happening when this person's born that has them not feel emotionally loved or emotionally nurtured, or their themes around residence or moving. Something might have happened emotionally in early childhood for Fred, Donald Trump's father, that did not have Fred feel emotionally in flow. In fact, the chart that Grand Cross says something extraordinarily like explosive. There's something explosive here. Pluto is a planet that was discovered when we discovered plutonium, 1930. So Pluto, plutocrats, plutonium, that's what Pluto means for humans and our becoming aware of it as a planet. Pluto, plutonium. Pluto's about themes of the underworld, like the
Mhm.
mythos of Persephone being stolen to the underworld by the devil or Satan or what have you, and that Persephone was against her will held. And
Mhm.
sexualized is a theme about Pluto as well. So we have themes of power, personal power, Pluto, opposite Mars, Fred's will, and this big grand cross of Venus and Mars and Moon. So Moon, mommy, relationship. Venus, affections. Mars, action. Pluto, power. The Grand Cross says there's major trouble here regarding Venus themes, Pluto themes, Mars themes, and here emotional
Mhm.
Moon themes for Fred. I wonder if we go back to Frederick Senior from Germany, what does his chart show? Oh well, we have a Mercury South Node Venus bundle here opposite Mars square Pluto. Mars
Mhm.
square Pluto for Frederick Senior. Mars square Mars opposing Pluto for Fred. So I'm beginning to see what you've shown on your slides here, Lisa, that these themes of Pluto, Mars, Venus are
Mhm.
big themes in this family. So
Yeah,
again, astrologically, there are positives to every archetype, right? There's a
yeah,
positive manifestation, the loving, and then there's the challenging or the trauma related. So
yeah.
what would we say about Pluto, Mars, Venus that are in Grand Cross trauma related to each other?
Mhm. Yeah, and Venus is, I was really struck by Venus is in Virgo, and Virgo energy, you know, is very much about creating order, but having it's got a critical eye, right? And the order is how the Virgo wants the order to be. So love was expressed, like to me, I can imagine if you were a certain way, if you fit inside the Virgo box, then and I think Donald did for Fred because he saw in him somebody that he could um you know Donald did he could take the family business and expand it and grow it, and he could,
Hmm.
he had a huge influence on him, whereas with Freddie Jr., his kind of his namesake, didn't see the killer instinct in him, so could he give him love because he didn't fit in the box that Fred wanted. um you know by all accounts too from the story, Fred's wife was very much like she would come in to
This is Donald's mother.
Donald's no, I'm sorry. This would have oh, I'm sorry. I think this was it was a story about one of the mothers would go into the her daughter-in-law's home and do like the put on the white glove, and look for dust, if you will. So I think that might have been no, I actually think that might have been Fred's wife who did that.
So
And
it was
that Venus and
Donald's mother, you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So
I think we're onto something here with the theme of critical love or
yeah,
abandoning love or pushing away love or refracted love. That's what I'm hearing, and going back to our presentation really quick to see if we can see some of these charts. So Donald's father, at least we great. One of these days we got to go look at Donald's mother, but Donald's
right.
father has Venus opposing Moon. It's a sort of an opposition, a seesaw, a challenge between Fred. This is again Donald Trump's father, Fred chart, Fred Trump, an opposition of emotion, or a kind of a flow problem, a lack of flow. If I always think of oppositions as a seesaw ride, either a good seesaw ride or maybe a bad seesaw ride. Well, here this Grand Cross suggests a challenge emotionally that Fred himself had in his youth. So I'm wondering if we go back to Fred
Maybe
to Fred's
big
father,
volatile
Frederick.
emotions too, because of the square to the moon, that Uranus Mars can blow up, right? And it can be very intense. It's opposite Pluto. So that would be another thing.
So right, so you're saying there's that Pluto opposite that Mars Pluto opposite square
Mhm.
that moon, square the Venus. Explosive emotions. I believe I had heard correctly, I'm sure from this chart, that Donald's father Fred had a quite a cruel streak. In fact, the sign of Virgo is known to be quite critical, maybe even sometimes devolving into cruelty. Every sign has its most beautiful side. Every sign has its most destructive or trauma-based side. And
Exactly.
when we see hard aspects like this in a chart, it leaps off the page to me as potential root of trauma. So again, we
Right.
said Pluto opposing Mars. That can be an indicator of explosive think of plutonium, like Hiroshima, explosive violence or explosive aggression. I look at Frederick Sr., and I go back to his chart here and see that Pluto square Mars,
Mm-hmm.
Pluto square Mercury, Pluto not square Venus, but it's involved in a little complex there to me, frankly, and that Saturn squaring Venus for Frederick Sr. So there again is a chart that's very full of challenge. Like what leaps off the page when you view it, that Mars opposite Mercury square Pluto and
Mm-hmm.
Saturn singleton up here by itself. It's called actually a bucket chart. Some would say it's not a true bucket chart, but I look at it as a bucket chart. One hemisphere occupied and one singleton up top. Saturn. Saturn is survival. Saturn is rigor. Not long after Frederick Sr. was born, Germany was plunged into a terrible financial debt situation. Its own, what do you call it? Financial collapse that
Yeah,
led.
kind of like the depression that Fred, was able to take advantage of.
So Frederick left Germany himself, great grandfather for Junior, left Germany because of financial difficulties and financial gain. Frederick opened brothels and restaurants and was, gold prospecting and serving gold prospectors and a number of shady deals. I think history, if we go back to history, we see a number of shady deals. This is a chart, Frederick Sr., of Saturn, survival themes, Pluto, Persephone, survival themes for Frederick. And then we see Pluto, Mars, Moon, Venus for Fred, survival themes. Again, control, domination, and safety survival themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you're working with, say, let's say, with a person like Donald's chart, and we go back to in history to his dad's chart, in the family constellations work, how do we join these or start to the Pluto Mars themes? I guess start to percolate.
Yeah, and I think if we carry these themes, because with Frederick, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't, obviously he's older, we don't know as much, but I mean, he kind of started this whole entrepreneurial businessman. He definitely took advantage of it, but then we see with Fred, being investigated for going right up to the edge of the law. And then when we get to President Trump, he's the first president that is a convicted felon, right? So if we don't catch these themes and try to positively shift them, we can see them just grow in intensity. And
So
we can,
I kind of
so
when
that's
I
typically what happens if something isn't addressed, it's almost like you turn up the dial a little bit down the generational line.
I think a word sort of sums it all up. Familiar. What
Yeah.
is familiar?
Yeah.
Our habituation.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you'd mentioned that in our last presentation that the nodes in these gentlemen's chart, all of them have very prominent nodal moon's nodes. The moon's nodes
Yeah.
conjoined in opposite vital parts of the chart, and the nodes describe dharma and karma. They describe soul evolution issues.
They do. And then in this transgenerational work, when you have a planet conjunct the south node or the north node, then not only are you taking on just your family of origins issues potentially, but you're taking on the whole family lineage to either continue the theme or to interrupt the pattern. So
Lisa,
it's
have
something we see, it's when you have planets conjunct the nodes, it's really significant. And we have this across 4 generations in the Trump men.
have you heard that when a planet is conjoined someone's nodes, north or south node, that there is with the north node a sense of promise or possibility, but conversely with the south node, some kind of demotion or flat tire or something a problem with that. Like it considers it a south node conjunct considers difficulty or detriment or some kind of lineage trauma.
Yeah, I've heard that, and something to definitely to be worked out. I think also when you have a planet square the nodes, then we're also looking at going to shore something up because something was missed. So there's a need to balance that out in the squares. In transgenerational work, if you have a planet conjunct the North Node, you're taking that family lineage theme and you're continuing it on in some way. But when it's conjunct the South Node, there you are interrupting the family lineage pattern. So the interesting thing with Donald, because he's born on that eclipse, right? He's got a planet conjunct that is conjunct the South and the North Node. The sun and the moon are conjunct the South and North Node in his chart. And so he is, and if you look at, Fred was somewhat well known, especially in New York, right? I don't know that Frederick ever made, it to the being famous, if you will. But if we look at, president, he's now president twice, right? So he's been able to just kind of take this family theme and in one way exemplify it and has the potential to interrupt it. Um, I don't know. I think he's definitely um maybe you can make arguments that he's doing both. He's definitely exemplifying it for sure.
Well, Donald Trump certainly, famously or infamously, since he's born during a lunar eclipse, and I love to, again, the astronomy of it. It is the astronomy of it. What's a lunar eclipse?
Yeah.
We have the sun setting or rising, let's say. We have the sun on one side of the sky, the moon opposite a full moon, and we have the
Mm-hmm.
earth in between. And so,
Mm-hmm.
since the earth is exactly in between, the earth casts its shadow on the moon. That's what a lunar eclipse is. So, the
Right.
earth's shadow is covering the moon. And I think that's an interesting, as all astrology is, a metaphor where for Donald, the ego, the sun, the light of consciousness, the birth, your spirit energy, is in some way opposite to your moon, your gut, your plexus, your soul energy. And the
Mm-hmm.
earth's smack in between. The earth's shadow is covering that emotion. So there's another theme of emotions being covered or obscured. And I think you were sharing with Fred's chart, that grand cross involving
Mm-hmm.
the moon and Venus. Again,
Yeah.
oppositional forces or obscuring forces. Uh, it suggests again that lineage of trauma. I
Mm-hmm.
also infamously use wide orbs when I work with clients, and while no other astrologer sees Fred Donald's father, Fred's moon at 25 Pisces and his South Node Saturn conjunction at 26, 27 Aquarius, no astrologer sees it as a conjunction, but I see it. I see it as a connection. I see it as an alignment here. I see it as a Saturn South Node Moon complex opposing Fred's Venus. And it says there is definitely some theme here around emotion and how he processes emotion, what he does with his feelings, as
Right.
well as we see with Donald, what he does with his emotions and his feelings. And by the way, what they do with women. Well, a theme with Frederick opening, and monitor and maintaining brothels. What the family does with with energy and feminine. Not only, by the way, is the moon governing women, and in medical astrology, the moon, but Pluto, they say, also is the feminine. Pluto, I look at as matriarchy. Moon is mother and mommy in the womb, motherhood, women. Pluto is matriarchy. If we look at the Pluto complex in this family, there's a huge Pluto theme in each of these charts that's really
Yeah.
powerful. A theme
Yeah.
around matriarchy and or women's power, and or what relationship each of these gentlemen have towards matriarchy and women's power are a big theme in all of these charts. Maybe the one chart that we haven't gotten to yet in brief, I'll just zip forward for a second, is Donald Jr. Uh, Here
Mm-hmm.
we do have kind of a Moon Pluto complex here. They're not too far in the sky from each other. In
Mm-hmm.
Junior's chart, Moon 21 Virgo, Pluto 16 Libra, and the North Node there 10 Libra. So I'm starting to see with that Libra North Node Pluto, what you pointed out about Pluto being powerful. It's
Mm-hmm.
squaring, the nodes are squaring Donald Jr.'s sun. So I wonder what you might share about Donald Jr.'s chart.
You know, he's, yeah, I mean, all likelihood, he's going to just continue the family lineage because of that conjunction. And although, the interesting thing about Donald Jr., he doesn't, he's definitely, I don't see him as being able to stand in his power like I do see in President Trump and Fred and Frederick. He's so because the flip side of being a very powerful person is feeling like you're controlled. And so I would, it'd be a question I would have for Donald Jr. How powerful does he feel? Probably more powerful than Eric,
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of, just what you hear President Trump say about them. But I would question how powerful he feels, how much control of his destiny he feels. And he's overshadowed by a very strong, prominent father, whereas Fred Trump with Donald, I feel like he needed Donald to expand him more, but I don't know that Junior is going to do that for President Trump. Well, I mean, time will tell. He definitely has the Pluto theme. I just don't see him as capable or as able to stand in the power, and I would think he would feel a little bit more controlled by circumstances, would be my guess.
So for Donald Trump Jr., we have December 31st of 1977, 5:20 in the evening in Manhattan, New York. For those of you who are listening, what's interesting about Donald Jr.'s chart also is that Jupiter Black Moon conjunction, but Jupiter opposite his Sun Venus conjunction. So
Hmm.
what opens and closes Junior's chart is a Jupiter Sun Venus opposition, and Jupiter Jove, Sun Venus pleasure. So the themes of pleasure and joviality and fun and play, well, we have seen some of that with Donald Jr. in different ways. But that seems to be a driving force in Donald Trump Jr.'s chart. With Donald Trump Sr., we don't see that. We don't see that joviality. What we see is Marshall, Pluto
Yeah,
Mars.
right.
The Marshall piece is really taking over. And again,
And and
yeah.
going back to the theme, right? Is he a killer or a loser? You know?
Ah, so, well, okay, thank you. So, in the family constellations work and in the Trump family verbiage,
Hmm.
you're saying that Frederick was the one who had reiterated, I guess, the teachings of Frederick Sr., which was is there are winners and losers. So
Right.
you were saying that idea of winner or loser came from Fred, from Donald Trump's father,
That's the first time that I had heard that. And again, we don't really know as much about Frederick, I
or
don't
Fred,
or Fred as much, but we definitely know through Mary's firsthand accounts as having spent time there and him putting those people in two camps in the family. And money was expressed to the killers, and money was handed down the line to the killers versus the losers because her family was cut out of the family, or they tried to cut him out of the family fortune, which is again that Venus theme. So when you brought in, that jovial aspect,
for Donald Jr.
or Don Jr., because
Uh,
there's been accounts of him partying, right? And
well,
so I mean that might not be viewed as having the killer instinct.
right. In strictly astrological parlance, right? Jupiter prominent
Mm.
to a person's sun is
Mm.
going to indicate some kind of freedom Jupiter theme or playful theme or Jupiter Jove jovial theme, from hunting to doing drugs to partying to raves, to skiing, whatever we see with Donald Trump Jr. He doesn't seem to have a militaristic, except he did go big game hunting with Jupiter again as adventure, by the way, and Jupiter
Yeah.
rules large animals, right? So Jupiter, he goes big game hunting, and notice again, Jupiter sextile Mars. There's a semi-sextile Mars. There's a quality of big animals and Mars murder, but he did go big game hunting. He likes to be this playboy entrepreneur, Donald Trump Jr.
Hmm.
and that theme of Jupiterian sort of, I think of Pan or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or Puck, Pan or Puck, one of these kinds of, you know, he's sort of a playful devil compared to Donald Trump Sr., which people were just saying recently, I think in the media, that people who know Trump say he never laughs, he never smiles. There's never a genuine, um,
You don't see it a
type.
lot, he puts on that face. It's interesting. I mean, for his father, the power of positive thinking, everything's always great, but yeah, he's kind of got that set jaw, right? And just wants to be a strong man.
Yeah, well, I mean, those of us who practice astrology, it's tough to miss in terms of, again, astrology 101, as I call it, with Donald
Yeah.
Trump's chart, that the ascendant of a chart describes one's physical body and
Hmm.
one's look, and any
Hmm.
planet there describes or highlights. So Pluto can be private or tough to read or controlling. Leo rising for Donald Trump can be egoic. Of course, 29 Leo is Regulus, the heart of the line, the fixed star, one of the four royal stars of Egypt. It's
Right.
particularly about monarchy and rulership. His Mars is right there. Mars is orange astronomically, and Donald
Mhm.
is definitely quite literally orange, chooses orange at least. And so there is that aggressive. He is, Donald likes to be the strong man and be aggressive. Donald Jr., as you said, maybe he doesn't carry on that family tradition because he is kind of a playful partier.
Hmm. Hmm.
Although that Mars is still in Leo. So we have,
I mean, it'll be interesting to see if he has political aspirations. I don't know. It doesn't seem, I don't see it as much in him.
I agree. I think an astrologer would see that Jupiter rising
Yeah.
as
Hmm.
being, how does he rise? In a Jupiterian way. Freedom, play, independence,
Right.
positivity. Jove is rising. It's
Yes.
interesting for Don Jr., Jupiter is rising, and just after Jupiter rises, Mars rises for Don Jr. So first we
Yeah.
get the joviality, then we get the Mars.
Yeah.
That Mars and Leo, like Donald has, that Mars and Leo, like great grandfather Frederick has.
Yes. Right. Right.
So
And
you
we'll
talked
tell.
also about the family themes consciously evolving, and how they may or may not consciously evolve.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, you can, the patterns can either consciously evolve or unconsciously evolve. And I see in not only in the charts, the interactions in the charts, but just the way that this is playing out, that they seem to be really intensely evolving to me a little bit more unconsciously. They're definitely, very or opportunistic.
Hmm.
Frederick going to new frontiers, and taking, you could say, I put in the slide opportunistic in terms of people's misfortunes, but I think it was more in the gold rush, taking that money and having him spend it on either a way to escape through alcohol or, you know, um, with pleasure with the brothels. And then in terms of with Fred, he took advantage of um the misfortunes from a societal perspective of the Great Depression and use that to his great advantage. And you know, there's a lot that you could say about how that's evolving with President Trump and policies that he's implementing. There's the theme of this isn't necessarily a psychological theme, but it's interesting that we have the pandemic connections, right? Um, and that theme of like killers and losers, and with Frederick dying during the Spanish flu time, and then with President Trump overseeing, COVID-19 and that pandemic. So I thought that was interesting. There's the
It,
military. Oh, go ahead. Did you?
oh, I'm just interjecting that, since you pointed out Venus, Mars, and Pluto, In medical astrology, uh, Mars and Pluto both deal specifically with pathogens. Particularly
Right.
Pluto governs, they say in medical astrology, Pluto governs viruses.
Right.
And so you mentioned, wasn't it Frederick, the great grandfather for Junior, the one who came from Germany? He died of the Spanish flu at age 48.
He did. Yes. Yeah.
So that pandemic, that great pandemic of the U.S., where I think it was some huge number of people died of the Spanish flu,
hmm
and then of course, as you said, Donald himself, with that Pluto rising in his chart with Mars. Well, Donald governed over our pandemic and how we handled it.
Right. Exactly. So I just found that kind of an interesting theme. Um, Definitely with the military theme, which is very Martian, serving versus non-serving, because, Frederick didn't serve. Well, to my knowledge, none of the Trumps have served, correct?
I think you're
And
right.
then Donald was also sent, Mars is a 2 to 2.5 year cycle. So his mother became very ill when he was 2.5. And so by all accounts, he was kind of raised by a nanny to a great extent because
And
she
and this is
was pregnant.
Donald.
President Trump, yeah. And then because of his behavior, he was sent to a military school. So he graduated from a military school. Yeah, I think he was sent um away. Let's see. He was sent at age 13, sent to New York Military Academy due to behavioral problems at home and in school. So there is that theme of, and now he presides over the military. So, the military, very Martian theme. Um, and then, there's, you could argue that there is an abusive quality that is psychologically going down the Trump family line in terms of labeling people killers and losers, and um, the accusations against President Trump. Um, he has been found liable in civil cases for sexual abuse and defamation and for business fraud. So that just kind of the intensity of he's actually been held account to a certain extent by the law. Um, and then, of course, the immigrant theme is strong, not only with them being immigrants, marrying immigrants, but then also wanting to build the wall to keep the immigrants out. And now we have alligator Alcatraz, with deportation. So, if these themes aren't addressed, and women's rights have been greatly taken away under his administration. So, there's some common themes that just seem to be intensifying.
Interesting too. It occurs to me, um, that President Trump went to a military academy and yet didn't serve.
Right.
That his grandfather from Germany uh, avoided service in Germany and
Reported.
therefore wound up in the U.S.
Yeah.
I forget about Fred and whether Fred served, but you said that none of them have served in the
No, I don't,
military.
to my
Yet,
knowledge, I mean, I don't know if there was if that was an issue during his time, but to my knowledge, none of them have served in the military.
but also all four of these men,
hmm
Frederick came from Germany, Fred, his son, President Trump, and Don Jr. all have a prominent Mars in their charts, all four of them.
Yeah.
And Mars rules the hero,
Yeah.
the policeman. Mars is martial. Mars can talk about courage. Uh,
hmm
Firemen, many, many, many firemen, firewomen, many firemen have Mars prominent in their chart. Now it's
Yeah.
interesting. Pluto also governs things like the CIA, the FBI, things that are behind the scenes. Like I
Right.
recall, for instance, that George W. has a Pluto Mercury rising in his chart, and his father, George Sr., the head of the director of the CIA. I believe it was CIA, right? Not FBI,
Yeah.
CIA.
Was CIA. Uh-huh.
So Pluto is under sort of Persephone. Pluto,
Mhm.
the ruler of the underworld, what's not seen or readily seen. So both CIA, FBI. I've had DEA agent clients and FBI clients and people who are sort of secret agents, kind of a thing. Uh, Pluto also rules the mob and mafia
Right,
and crime organizations that are under the cover or not easily seen. And again,
right.
all these gentlemen, all four of the Trump family, have strong, as you said, Pluto themes.
Mhm.
Lastly, Pluto ruling viruses, Pluto also ruling assassins, hidden killers,
Mhm.
Mars ruling firemen. Gee, wasn't there an event with Donald Trump and a bullet, and where a fireman was murdered, where a fireman was killed by the assassin?
Yeah,
Interesting themes how these Pluto Mars. So
exactly.
so in terms of the family constellations work or healing work, um, I'm kind of curious what's the takeaway. It sounds like if we don't do the conscious work, if we don't do the conscious healing, then these familiar uh, traits perpetuate or gain power.
They can gain power, they can perpetuate. There can be descendants that come in entangled with the issues, trying to make it, whole. And it's I know we kind of talked about this. We're kind of just describing behaviors and actions, without necessarily making, the moralistic argument for it, except that when these patterns are just not playing, if they're affecting your life in a negative way, then it's always good to go back and see, what are the themes, and do those themes apply to what's not working in your life, and can you try to make it more balanced or whole and healed? Because there's to me there's like trying to have strength over instead of having strength for something.
Oh, that's it. Oh, I see. So the
That's
idea.
what I see in the men. Are they being strong to defend, or are they being strong to have power over? That's a question that you
So
can.
I kind of think when I work with clients, I not rarely use this construct that most of us are not born the Buddha. Most of us are not born Christ conscious or aware or necessarily spiritually evolved. We're kind of all a work in progress, and that a birth chart suggests the likelihood of flow and or where there may be challenge to flow, challenge to health, or maybe even downright trauma. So
Right.
I think most astrologers would concur when we see uh, difficult planets in astrology 101. Some planets are called benefic or flowing. They're
Yeah.
associated with cycles, with elements of our experience that are about growing and developmental flow. And then some planets are concordant with cycles that are oftentimes about developmental challenge. So
Hmm.
we're looking at Pluto Mars. Traditionally, they call them malefics or challenge planets that imply the potential for trauma. So are you a
Hmm.
heroic fireman or are you
Hmm.
lighting the fires? I think you were making reference to this before. And looking at a chart, can we know the difference of whether a person's the fireman, the hero, or the one lighting the fires?
I think it's for me, I find that very difficult to just look at a chart, and you can know the themes, but you don't really know how they're using it until you interact with them.
And that might be where modern astrology, since the 20s and 30s, say the charts don't compel, they impel, or they're more likely to show potentials, but
Tendencies.
we don't know the free will, that there's always free will. But there
Right.
are potentials. There are genetic markers, there is epigenetics, right?
Right, exactly. So, I think, to be quite honest, if you look at these charts with these men, I think there could, Venus and Mars are prominent, but trying to get more of a balance between them, it would be, to me, they would flow better.
So
Um,
maybe just to kind of
they're
as we
very,
head.
very much on the Mars. And I know I can have compassion. They come in with these strong themes, right, of the malefics, but are we standing up for the underdog, or are we trying to, beat the underdog down?
Well, so okay, so those are two different. So your the healing piece is what the healer, what you and your constellation work do with your clients and your patients. If we have someone here, we have Frederick with a Mars-Pluto square with a
Mhm,
configuration in the chart that suggests challenge, or Fred, who's got a Mars opposing Pluto theme here,
mhm.
and that big grand cross we described. Astrological aspects do describe challenge points versus flow. There are cycles that are considered flowing, cycles and patterns that are considered challenging astrologically. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean that it's definitely going to be acted out upon by the native, but this is where I oftentimes say um, what is habituated or familiar tends to reign.
yeah, right, exactly.
So we were talking about themes of uh, well,
That's where
uh,
epigenetics, I think, comes in. This marker gets turned on, this key gets turned on, and then the next generation is like, "Oh, hold my beer. I'm gonna, I'm gonna, I'm gonna ramp that up a little bit."
so great grandfather Frederick came from Germany, ran off to Alaska during the gold rush, to really actively serve people what they wanted, alcohol,
Mhm.
prostitutes, and used sort of clearly sort of the underbelly of society to make his power, to gain his power. He also owned restaurants and bought real estate and property.
Yeah,
That was
right.
Frederick Sr., Frederick, the great grandfather for Junior. And then Fred himself also was a land baron in Manhattan
Mhm.
who eventually was brought to court for a lot of illegal activity and denying people of color.
Investigated for sure. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I thought he was actually prosecuted, is what I thought happened to Frederick and to Donald. Frederick, his father, Fred and Donald both were, I believe, prosecuted for their illegal and underhanded dealings with regard to minority housing in New York City
They
area.
were sued for sure. Yeah, I don't good. I'm not 100% about the actual legal prosecution. Like, was it found guilty or did they settle? He might have settled. Um, when he was investigated for profiteering, for example, by the U.S. Senate committee, that ruined his reputation. And then if you go to Donald, so he was found guilty of falsifying business records in 2024. So that's where he was convicted of the felony. So again, we can see this, you know, we can see
Well,
the decline.
and Donald was again infamous in New York for not paying people, for
Right,
contracting
right,
builders.
exactly.
There was the issue of revifying Atlantic City, taking Atlantic City that had fallen to a terrible state over decades and decades. And Donald went to Atlantic City and said, "I will rebuild Atlantic City. I'll build plazas and I'll build casinos, and we're going to inject Atlantic City with a huge amount of money." And in the end, he built his Trump casinos and bussed people in, bypassing any of the money going to the community whatsoever that he had promised. So this kind of um, Pluto, underhanded. So Pluto, on the one hand, describes power, people in power, people, and generational power, generational wealth, and generational change. These
Mhm.
can be these people who've got powerful Pluto charts, this Trump family, they could be
Yeah.
agents of change for good or agents of change for things that are like Pluto, underhanded or not easily seen or not easily address themes, things of power and control from behind the scenes. And all of
Mhm.
them have that powerful Pluto.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. It's a whole family theme.
It strikes me too that somebody who finds empowerment um, might not do the work that would liberate that power domination theme. That they're more likely to be habituated, family habituated.
And so it's kind of interesting with Donald Jr. to see what happens with him because there's stars on the rise. But after President Trump, what will happen with the family, at that point? By all accounts, Barron is not going to be the one taking up the mantle to be the killer. So it'll be interesting to see, the legacy. and what, if anything shifts this.
Well, if we look at Donald Trump Jr.'s chart here, and we as we come to close fairly shortly here, with that Jupiter rising, Jupiter again, joviality is how he rises. In fact, with Donald Trump Jr.'s chart, the only planet above the horizon
It's
is
Jupiter.
Jupiter. So
Hmm.
what the outer world will know Donald Trump Jr. for, ostensibly, is for a jovial attitude or a
Yeah.
jovial affect or jovial interaction. Even if
Right.
even if Junior's chart has the moon's nodes with Pluto dead
Hmm.
square his sun.
Hmm.
So there's again a theme of power and domination and control, uh,
Yeah.
and or being controlled by,
Mhm.
as you said, by maybe his father. It certainly seems that way.
Kind
So
of seems
where might this lineage go? That Pluto theme is still present in Junior's chart, but
right.
but
Exactly.
but
And
what's really prominent is that Jupiter.
yeah, and that's where, it can skip a generation, and come back, or can come back a different way. You
Hmm.
might have um somebody who's a civil rights advocate leader, tries to empower the underdog. Um, so I mean it's got the potential. I mean, I think that you know, there's always a potential to shift the pattern. And I think when you usually shift a pattern when you hurt, and we haven't gotten quite to that point with this family yet, I don't think.
So that brings up again a theme. Mars rising in Leo,
Mhm.
Junior. Mars rising in Leo. The theme of power, the theme of strength, the theme of militaristic domination. Although with Junior, that Jupiter, it's a whole lot more fun to be playful and loving than it is to be constantly aggressively dominating.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you have to also remember because of his role in this country, he is he was he is a product of the consciousness of where the country is.
well, certainly when someone is Plutonian, also they tend to be drivers.
Yeah.
Throughout history, as far as I know, when Pluto is angular or near the angles, it's very common in the charts of dictators. It's one of
Mhm.
those notable cycles. And since we have a time of birth for Donald Jr. and for Donald Sr., Pluto with the angles continues to be a theme. Uh,
Yeah, and the US is in its Pluto return, first Pluto return. So, it speaks to that type of a leader to reveal, what we may want to change in this country, or reveal, it'd be interesting to see, where we go from here. But presiding, at that time of the Pluto return, in a way, it seems a little fitting.
so we've kind of come to the to close time here, I think, and I guess I just want to say, astrology always seems to have this quality. There is so much to look at, so much to
Yeah.
review. And here the issue is with family constellation work or any other psychotherapeutic work, how to take this information that the chart suggests and where to go forward with it. So
Mhm.
with that Mars Leo theme that three out of the four have in their chart that's so powerful, yet Donald Jr. has that Jupiter jovial piece that's very strong here.
Yeah.
What I wonder, would we as practitioners encourage him to go? I guess I'm going to say go to the light, but go toward the Jupiterian upliftment. Since Jupiter and Jove talks about healers and doctors and physicians and psychotherapists and people who uplift, or as I
Yeah.
say, someone who's got a prominent Jupiter is an uplifter. In Vedic astrology, they call Jupiter Guru. They don't call it a
Right.
Greco-Roman. They call it Guru. So here, Donald Jr. has Guru opposite his whole chart here, his son. He could be either an uplifter or not. But that would be a turning point. Maybe it's a turning point for him.
Be a turning point. I mean, he's a Capricorn, so, it's never too late to do something else. And he may be very much under the influence of his father at this point. And I don't know that he's going to be able to continue that road and amplify that, but maybe, maybe he can have I mean, because, Jupiter above the horizon, that could be the humanitarian, the very generous person, so it's got a lot of positive qualities it could step into.
Well, one thing about Donald's chart with Regulus rising here, the heart of the lion, the heart of the monarch, the singular degree and star that talks about monarchy, in which he's discussing monarchy in so many ways.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when someone is a leader or a monarch like that, ultimately they want to have things named after them, buildings and movements and a positive society. They want the society. It reminds me of dictator Mussolini. He was a Leo. Mussolini. He was a dictator, but he wanted to be loved, as many Leos do want to. I think a lot of Capricorns also ultimately want to be loved.
Mhm.
And here, I think Donald Jr., you're right. Maybe that Jupiter will suggest that he goes toward the generosity and wanting to be known for things that they've done as a family. So I think there's an issue of kind of reminds me of the Kennedys. I think that the Trump family and Donald himself, I think, has a Kennedy-esque, monarchic idea about being the next Camelot.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I'm wondering, after our, there's so much to look at here. There were some degrees that you brought up with this slide that I think we'll have to touch another time.
Yeah.
But there are powerful degree areas in these charts as well that they all share.
Mhm.
22 degrees of different signs and 17.
Yeah, and the 22 degrees I find, really fascinating because that was with the Pluto Saturn conjunction right before, in 2019, right before the whole world shut down, right? Um so Fred literally has Pluto at 22 degrees in Gemini, but then Donald has the vertex, which is the part of fate, in Capricorn ruled by Saturn, and that was the other planet that came together, right before the pandemic. So I found that really kind of fascinating. And then so many of the men have the 17 degrees, which in numerology, that's an eight, right? Eight is a lot about power. So,
Power and money themes. And in numerology, 22 is they say one of the master numbers.
oh, true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Describes somebody who has power or influence in
Yeah.
some grand way. It can go either way, though. There's again the free will element that we can't know for
Yeah.
sure.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, so here's a little feedback, a little info, a page rather for you for people to give you feedback and for people to consult with you and set up appointments with you. So, dear Lisa, people can reach you at futureecho.org,
Yes.
www.futureecho.org.
Yep. Two E's.
Wonderful. And also, of course, your info is going to be on the page and page information on my websites and my podcasts and so forth. So thank you, dear Lisa. It's again always just so powerfully positive to have you. And there's so much. I always feel like we open up just
Pandora's
lots
box.
of different doorways, Pandora's box in a way,
Yeah.
doorways of things to investigate. So
Yeah.
perhaps I count on actually that we'll have you again to dig a little deeper.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And I guess I always say, Donald Trump's chart, it's just a powerhouse chart.
It is a
There's no
powerhouse.
doubt. It's a powerhouse chart that Trump has
Yeah.
and powerful in its implications. And so a great
Mhm.
learning tool for astrology and the whole family for that matter.
Yeah, for sure.
Terribly interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for bringing it all to us, dear Lisa. You're magnificent. Look forward to having you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings.